Hello and welcome to another Modern Commerce Talks from Avensia. I'm your host Jack Stratten from Insider Trends and delighted to be joined again by Colin Ingram, a developer at Avensia who's been working with the Nordic Nest project.
Thanks, Ross, for having me.
So super interesting what we were talking about last time, and what kind of makes coding so rewarding within composable commerce, and I certainly learned a lot. You touched a couple of times on maybe what's different about working with API-first solutions. I've heard that mentioned a few times within composable commerce. So my question for this session, really, the kind of fundamental question is, why do developers want to work with API-first solutions? Because it seems like they do. So what is it about API-first solutions that attracts developers like you?
I think in the past, APIs have been kind of an afterthought of the product, of a product. And in some sense, you build your product and then you open it up to people to use with these APIs. And that often means that sometimes you make some compromises in the API design, or it's not really thought through. And then what you end up as a developer is with something that's a little bit difficult to use with. It doesn't quite fit and it's a little bit uncomfortable. And the shift to API first has been a really positive one from my perspective as a developer, because you get much more well thought out contracts basically with these products. So for instance, like commercetools, Contentful, In River, these sort of solutions, they've thought a lot more about who will be consuming them, and the developer is one of the people that will be consuming them. And often the success of an application is influenced by people's willingness to adopt it. So if you have a well thought out API and you have SDKs that are really well maintained and constantly evolving, you have flexibility in how you can use it, whether it's using REST APIs or GraphQL, you really have a system that's kind of asking to be used. You end up kind of creating a relationship with the people that consume it. They can trust this contract that you present, and in return they can build things upon your platform that they can trust and rely on. And that fosters, I think, a good relationship between developers and the product itself. And commercetools is a classic example of this. They have lots of extensibility points and quite elegant ones in terms of things like API extensions, the merchant center, their kind of back end insight into the commercetools that can be extended as well with custom applications. And the list goes on. They have tons of SDKs in different programming languages and really good documentation. So it's really easy as a developer to kind of just to start and just get going and get working on the important bit, which is creating a solution for your customer or your product.
It's really, really interesting. I hadn't really thought about it like this, but when you're touching on how an API first solution is that much more kind of usable and flexible and attractive for the developer as the user, but actually how much of an impact that has, and it makes a complete sense, but I hadn't thought about it like this, how much impact that has on the final product. In other words, by making the developer happy, you're kind of making ultimately the end user happy, because the developer's that much more enthusiastic about using this particular thing.
Exactly. I mean, if you hit roadblocks at every junction when you're trying to create a solution because it's not been well thought out or there's a problem, then you start to build a kind of resentment towards it. And maybe I don't want to use this because maybe it's making my life more hassle. But if it's really easy to use, then you have a kind of a more positive outlook towards the product as a whole. And a lot of these products like Contentful for the CMSs and commercetools for e-commerce they put a lot of thought into it, and both from an architecture perspective and also for a consumption perspective for their clients and their customers. So I think it definitely results in a better experience for developers, and it's much more fun to work with day to day.
And I suppose it's a reminder that how important this is, because it's the developers that are going to go on to probably influence the decisions around what tools are used in lots of different companies and lots of different scenarios. Because ultimately, if you've got a big team of developers, what they are happy to use, the kinds of tools and the kinds of systems, that is massively influential. That's kind of what becomes apparent to me. It may be someone above them that makes some of the initial decisions about the contracts that are agreed, but I guess what I'm saying is making your developers happy about the tools they use. That is incredibly important, not just now, but long into the future.
Yeah, exactly. And from a customer perspective, like if you have your own development team, and say Avensia have their own development team, you can work together on the same objective very easily. They're not these closed systems; they're very open. So you can work against the same APIs. You have a shared understanding, and then you end up with a kind of a better ownership of the system that's being developed, rather than these sort of closed systems where all requests have to go through the company, or they have to, you have to jump through hoops to allow people insight into the finished product. So I think the APIfirst is in a composable context is a really, really good thing, a really positive thing.
And just to kind of as a final point, I've heard a few times as an interesting side point when people have been talking about composable versus monolith, headless versus whatever, these kinds of discussions. It's been brought up a lot that composable commerce, for better or worse, it does require a lot of developers, a lot of coding. That's part of the nature of the tool and the model. So I guess what's very encouraging is that I guess what I'm saying is it becomes even more important with the amount of coding that actually the developers are really happy with the tools they use, and that they have the flexibility, and that it's rewarding, which we talked about in the last session. And yeah, is that, I mean, from your experience so far with Nordic Nest, there clearly is a lot of coding that's going on with projects like that. And yeah, so I get, it must really elevate the importance of, you being able to actually enjoy that work, because there's a lot of it. There's a lot of coding with these solutions.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the trade-offs, a big trade-off of composable commerce and in general, of using these sort of polyglot architectures where you have best in class or whatever they feel is best, is that you have to kind of orchestrate them together, and that's where a product like Excite comes in, because it's the sort of glue between the bricks that keeps it together. So you still will need to do quite a lot of coding to try and build in how the customers' flows and how they treat data and how they treat their commerce process into that system. And having easy APIs and well thought out APIs and connections means that that's a lot easier to do, and a lot easier to work with in the future and going forward. If they want to build in features, it becomes much easier to do that, and you can extend the initial solution based on the customer's needs. And as we've seen in the last year, things like click and collect, these sort of things are much more possible than if you didn't have if you had an archaic or sort of monolith infrastructure that was hard to extend. So I think it really is a good thing, even though it adds somewhat extra complexity.
Yeah, it's worth that extra effort and extra work.
Exactly.
Colin, it's been so interesting to get the developer perspective on all of this. We've been talking a lot about Excite and commerce tools with lots of different people, but brilliant to be able to speak to someone, kind of on the ground actually building this stuff. Super interesting. So thanks so much for your time. And thank you for listening. We'll be back with another one soon. But thank you for now, and we'll see you again. Cheers.
Thanks.